My name is Vanessa Hayes. I'm 41 years old, and I've worked as an art acquisitions consultant at the Miriam Foster Gallery in Denver for the past 9 years. People assume it's a hobby job, something to fill time between charity luncheons. It's not. I built the gallery's contemporary collection, from 12 pieces to over 200. Last year, I brokered the acquisition of a Cara Walker installation that doubled our annual visitor numbers. But to Derek, I worked part-time at a gallery. We met at a mutual friend's wedding in Boulder when I was 25. He was 29, charming, ambitious, working in pharmaceutical sales and talking about regional management, positions like they were inevitable. He noticed my grandmother's vintage Cartier watch and asked about it before he asked my name. I should have paid attention to that. The house, this house, sat on a tree-lined street in Denver's Cheeseman Park. Neighborhood. My grandmother, Dorothy Hayes, bought it in 1952 for $14,000. She was a widow at 38 and refused to be pitied. She taught piano lessons in the front parlor, rented out the upper bedroom, and kept the garden so beautiful that neighbors still mentioned it decades later. When she died, she left the house to me, not my older brother, Marcus. Not split between us, just me. Because as her will stated, Vanessa is the only one. Whoever listened when I talked about what these walls meant, the house wasn't worth much then. The neighborhood was still transitioning. The roof needed replacing. The foundation had cracks. But I loved it the way you love things that hold your history. My father, Richard Hayes, was a union contractor. Together, we spent weekends and evenings restoring the house. We replaced the roof ourselves. We tore out water-damaged drywall. We refinished the original hardwood floors on our hands and knees. I met Derek during this period. He'd stop by occasionally, always impressed by the progress. Once he helped me paint the guest bedroom. He chose the wrong paint finish and I had to redo it later. But he talked about it for years like he'd rebuilt the foundation. After we married, I added his name to nothing. Not because I didn't trust him. I did. At first. But because my grandmother's attorney, Margaret Chen, had been very clear. This house is your inheritance, she'd said. Keep it separate. If the marriage thrives, wonderful. If it doesn't, you'll thank me. I remember laughing. I'm not worried about that. Margaret hadn't laughed back. I've been doing this for 30 years, Vanessa. Just keep it separate. So I did. Derek never asked why. I assumed he didn't care. Over the years, I watched him begin taking credit for things he hadn't done. When colleagues visited, he'd gesture toward the built-in bookshelves my father constructed and say, I designed these. When neighbors complimented the garden, he'd talk about our vision despite never pulling a single weed. At first, I corrected him gently. Then I stopped. It seemed petty to argue over who planted the roses, but the pattern expanded. At dinner parties, he'd describe my gallery work as something to keep her busy. He'd introduce me as my wife, Vanessa. She dabbles in art. Once, at his company holiday party, someone asked what I did. Before I could answer, Derek said, She helps out at a little gallery downtown. Keeps her out of trouble. The woman had laughed politely. I'd excused myself to the restroom and stared at my reflection for 5 full minutes. Marcus, my older brother, noticed before I admitted it to myself. He talks about you like you're a dependent, Marcus said one Sunday while helping me install new gallery lighting. He doesn't mean it that way. Doesn't he? I changed the subject, but Marcus's words stayed with me. 3 months before that Tuesday morning, I'd started noticing changes. Derek came home later. He was protective of his phone. He joined a gym and bought new cologne. Classic signs, obvious enough that I felt stupid for not confronting them sooner, but I didn't want to be that wife. Suspicious, controlling, paranoid. Instead, I paid attention. I noticed restaurant charges in neighborhoods he'd never mentioned visiting. I saw hotel points accumulating on statements for trips he claimed were too brief for overnight stays. Once I found a receipt for jewelry I'd never received. When I asked about it, he said, Client gift. $400 for a client gift? It's called investing in relationships, Vanessa. You wouldn't understand. That sentence, you wouldn't understand, became his favorite response. I didn't understand business. I didn't understand networking. I didn't understand how demanding his career was. Except I did understand. I understood he was rewriting our history to justify his present. The morning Christine walked into my house, I'd been planning to confront him. I had printed bank statements, receipts, a list of questions. I was going to ask for marriage counseling or honesty or at the very least, basic respect. Instead, he brought another woman into my grandmother's house and told her he built it. That changed everything. After Christine left, Derek didn't apologize. He blamed me. "You humiliated me," he said. "You brought another woman into my house. She's a colleague. Who thinks you're separated?" He grabbed his keys from the hall table. "I'm staying at a hotel. We'll talk when you're calmer." Derek. But he was already gone. I stood alone in the entryway for a long time. Then I walked upstairs to our bedroom and did what I should have done months earlier. I looked. Derek's laptop sat on his desk, charging. He usually took it everywhere, but in his rush to leave, he'd forgotten it. I opened it. No password. He'd disabled it years ago, claiming he had nothing to hide. The browser history told a different story. Hotel reservations under his name, dinner receipts from the same Italian restaurant, repeated every Thursday for 2 months, jewelry purchases, flowers sent to an address I didn't recognize. I opened his email. The messages to Christine began in March, 4 months ago. They weren't subtle. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Wear the necklace I bought." She's completely clueless, too busy playing art dealer to notice anything. "Once the promotion goes through, I'll have enough saved to make this permanent." I read that last line 3 times. Enough saved to make this permanent. I opened our joint bank account. The balance looked normal. Then I opened the individual account he'd insisted on keeping separate for work expenses. Over $47,000. My hands went numb. For 11 years, Derek had contributed exactly nothing to our household expenses. I'd paid property, taxes, utilities, insurance, groceries, repairs, everything. He claimed his salary barely covered his car payment, student loans, and work expenses. He'd been lying. I took screenshots of everything. Then I checked our credit cards. One I didn't recognize appeared under his name only, opened 6 months ago. The balance was $12,000, mostly charges at restaurants, hotels, and retail stores I'd never heard of. He'd been building a separate financial life. That night I called Marcus. "He brought her to the house," I said. Silence. Then, "I'm coming over." Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with Thai food and the kind of quiet fury only older brothers manage. He listened while I walked him through everything. The affair, the lies, the money, the credit card. "You need a lawyer," he said finally. "I know. Not just any lawyer. Margaret Chen, the one who handled Grandma's estate." I nodded. I'd been thinking the same thing. Marcus hesitated. "Vanessa, I need to tell you something." I looked up. 2 months ago, Derek called me. He wanted to know about the house trust. Asked whether it was truly irrevocable or if there were any loopholes. My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I told him to ask you." Marcus's jaw tightened. He said he was just curious about our family's estate planning. I didn't think much of it then. Now, he was looking for ways to claim the house. Yeah, I thought about that. About Derek calculating, planning, researching, legal loopholes while lying. Beside me every night. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the slow, deliberate erasure of my contributions, my history, my worth. "I'm not letting him take this house," I said quietly. Marcus smiled. "Good, because Grandma would haunt us both if we did, Margaret." Chen's office sat in a renovated Victorian near downtown Denver. I arrived on a Thursday morning, carrying a folder thick with printed bank statements, emails, screenshots, and a timeline I'd created on a legal pad at 2 a.m. Margaret was 68 now, her black hair streaked with silver, her office filled with orchids and family photos. She'd been my grandmother's, attorney for 30 years and mine for the past 15. "I wondered when you'd come," she said after I explained everything. "You knew?" I suspected. Men like Derek always reveal themselves eventually. She opened my folder and began reading. After 10 minutes, she looked up. "You've documented this thoroughly. I'm a researcher by training." She smiled. "It shows. Here's what we're dealing with. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, but this house is yours. The trust is irrevocable. Derek has no claim." Relief washed over me. "However," Margaret continued, "he's clearly been concealing assets. This separate account, the credit card, the savings. He'll argue these are marital property." "But I never touched them." "Exactly. Which means they're his separate property, built from his income. You won't get half. But more importantly, he can't claim half of anything you've kept separate either." She walked me through next steps. File for legal separation. Request financial disclosure. Secure the house by documenting its trust status. Freeze joint accounts. What about the affair? I asked. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state. His infidelity won't affect asset division, but it creates narrative. It shows character. And if he's been using marital funds for hotels and gifts, she tapped the credit card statement. That's dissipation of marital assets. You can request reimbursement. I left her office 3 hours later with a plan. Over the next week, I gathered everything. 11 years of property tax payments all in my name. Utility bills all in my name. Insurance policies listing me as sole owner. The family trust documents. Photos of my father and me renovating the house, time-stamped years before my marriage. Receipts proving Derek's $47,000 in savings came from income he'd claimed was barely covering expenses. Then Margaret filed. Derek received the separation papers on a Monday morning at work. He called me 16 times. I didn't answer. He showed up at the house that evening. I opened the door but didn't let him inside. What the hell is this? He waved the papers. Exactly what it looks like. You can't just kick me out of my own house. It's not your house, Derek. It never was. His face turned red. I've lived here for 11 years. Rent-free. We're married. This is marital property. Actually, it's trust property. Read page 4. He stared at me. You planned this. No, you planned something. I'm just responding to it. I made one mistake. You made hundreds. I'm just done cataloging them. He tried charm next. Vanessa, come on. We can work this out. Christine meant nothing. I don't care about Christine. I care that you told her you built this house, that you've spent years erasing my contributions while hoarding money and lying about expenses. I was saving for our future. You were building an exit strategy. He had no answer for that. Here's what happens next, I said. You have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings. After that, the locks change. Margaret will send financial interrogatories. You'll answer them honestly, or we'll subpoena your bank records. You're being vindictive. I'm being fair. You just don't recognize it because you've never experienced consequences before. I closed the door. Through the frosted glass, I watched his shadow stand there for a long time before finally walking away. Derek moved his belongings out on a Wednesday. He took his clothes, his laptop, his golf clubs, and the expensive espresso machine he'd bought himself for Christmas. He left the furniture. Most of it had belonged to my grandmother anyway. The house felt lighter without him, but Derek wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, he filed a counterpetition. His attorney argued that despite the trust, Derek had substantially improved the property and deserved compensation. They claimed his sweat equity and financial contributions to household maintenance entitled him to a portion of the home's appreciated value. It was absurd, but it was also strategic. Margaret called me. He's bluffing. He knows he won't win, but he's hoping you'll settle to avoid court. I'm not settling. Good, because I found something. She'd subpoenaed Derek's employer as part of financial discovery. His expense reports revealed something interesting. For 18 months, he'd been claiming mileage and meal reimbursements for client meetings. That never happened. Christine wasn't a client. She was a colleague in the same regional office. Their relationship had begun at a company conference in March. Every business dinner he'd expensed was actually a date. Every client site visit was a hotel stay. Derek had been defrauding his employer. What do we do with this? I asked. Margaret's expression was neutral. Technically, we're required to disclose evidence of financial malfeasance during asset discovery. His income is marital property. If he's been inflating it through fraudulent reimbursements, that's relevant. You're saying we have to report him. I'm saying the truth has a way of emerging in legal proceedings. 3 days later, Derek's attorney received our financial disclosures, including the expense reports. Derek called me that night, furious. You reported me to my company? I disclosed financial records during a legal proceeding. What your employer does with them isn't my concern. They're launching an investigation. I could lose my job. Then you probably shouldn't have filed false expense reports. This is revenge. No, Derek, this is documentation. He hung up. A week later, his attorney withdrew the counterpetition. Derek's company suspended him pending their internal audit, and Christine, who'd been listed as attending several of those fictional client meetings, was also under review. The court hearing for temporary orders was scheduled for early September. Derek showed up in an expensive suit looking confident. His attorney presented arguments about Derek's contributions and investments in our shared life. Then Margaret stood. She presented the trust documents, photos of my father and me renovating, time-stamped years before my marriage, 11 years of property tax payments, utility bills, insurance policies. Then she introduced Derek's expense reports. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes has argued he made significant financial contributions to the household. Our evidence shows otherwise. While Ms. Hayes paid all property-related expenses, Mr. Hayes accumulated $47,000 in personal savings while claiming financial hardship. Additionally, he systematically defrauded his employer by filing false expense reports for personal expenditures. Derek's attorney objected. Relevance, Your Honor. It establishes a pattern of financial dishonesty, Margaret said calmly. The judge reviewed the documents. Then he looked at Derek. Mr. Hayes, did you or did you not file expense reports for personal meals and travel? Derek's attorney whispered to him. Derek cleared his throat. I may have occasionally categorized personal expenses as business-related, but... Thank you, the judge said. That's sufficient. The ruling was swift. The house remained mine, held in trust. Derek had no claim. He was ordered to pay his own legal fees. And the judge noted that any future motions would require substantial new evidence. Outside the courtroom, Derek's attorney looked exhausted. Derek looked broken. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a quiet certainty that I'd protected what mattered. Marcus met me on the courthouse steps. How'd it go? It's over. He hugged me. Grandma would be proud. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. On a cold January morning, Derek's employer terminated him 3 weeks before that. The internal audit confirmed he'd filed over $18,000 in fraudulent expense, reports over 18 months. They didn't press criminal charges, but they demanded repayment and flagged his record. He found new work eventually, a smaller company, lower salary, no expense account. Christine transferred to a different regional office. I never saw her again. The house became entirely mine in a way it always had been, but now legally recognized. I changed the locks anyway. It felt symbolic. Life didn't transform overnight. I still worked at the gallery. I still visited Marcus on Sundays. I still tended my grandmother's garden. But something had shifted. One Saturday afternoon, I was replanting the rose bushes along the front walk when my neighbor, Patricia, stopped on her morning walk. I heard about Derek, she said carefully. I'm sorry. I'm not. She smiled. Good. He always took credit for your garden. It used to drive me crazy. I laughed. You noticed that? Everyone noticed. We just didn't know how to tell you. After she left, I stood there holding a spade. Dirt under my fingernails, surrounded by the garden I'd built. For years, I'd let Derek rewrite our story. I'd stayed quiet when he claimed my work. I'd accepted his diminishment because confronting it felt petty. But silence isn't peace. It's just delayed honesty. My grandmother once told me. A house is just wood and nails until you fill it with your own life. Then it becomes irreplaceable. She was right. Derek had lived in this house for 11 years, but he'd never made it his. He'd occupied space I created, taken credit for work I'd done, and convinced himself, and others, that he'd built something from nothing. The truth was simpler. I'd built it. My grandmother had built it. My father had built it. Derek had just lived here. 6 months after the divorce, Marcus helped me renovate the kitchen, the project I'd been measuring for the day. Derek brought Christine home. We tore out the old cabinets, installed new countertops, painted the walls a soft sage green. You know, Marcus said while we worked, I used to worry you'd never stand up to him. I worried about that too. What changed? I thought about that. I stopped being afraid of losing something that was never really mine to lose. The marriage? His approval. We worked in comfortable silence after that. On the 1-year anniversary of that Tuesday morning, I hosted a dinner party. Margaret came, Marcus and his wife, Patricia from next door, colleagues from the gallery. We ate in the dining room under my grandmother's chandelier. We laughed. We told stories. No one mentioned Derek. Afterward, Margaret pulled me aside. You did well, Vanessa. I just told the truth. That's harder than people think. She squeezed my hand. Your grandmother knew what she was doing when she left you this house. I wish she'd left instructions for what to do with it. Margaret smiled. She did. She left it to you. That was the instruction. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, my kitchen now, and looked around. The house was quiet, solid, mine. I thought about Derek's words. "You've been living off me for years." And Christine's, "You're so lucky to live somewhere he created." They'd both been wrong. I hadn't been living off anyone. I'd been living deliberately, carefully, in a space built by generations of strong women who refused to be erased. And I'd finally learned to do the same.